Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us today for how to attain strategic alignment and seamless execution. Today, we're talking to some of the foremost leaders in the project and portfolio management field to provide insights and tools to help you drive better decisions in your organization. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. The webinar will be recorded and sent to you following the event, so you can share it with others and rewatch it as you would like. This is also interactive. We are live, so please put your questions in the Q&A box and we will get to as many of them as we can. Now is your chance to pick the brains of some of the experts in the field who have been there, done that, and have some great insights and strategy to share with you. I am very pleased to be joined by Dr. Mike Clayton. Mike has been managing projects and training project managers for over 30 years. He began his career at Dilute Consulting, leading major client projects and developing program management methodologies. Mike is a prolific writer, speaker, and trainer, author of 14 books. He's the founder of Online PM Courses, and his YouTube channel has over 120,000 subscribers with a library of over 600 videos on project management. So Mike's a guy that you want to follow his YouTube channel and learn all about project management as we go. Also joining us is Jim Patterson, Vice President at OnePlan. Jim has over 28 years of experience in the design, implementation, and training for project and portfolio management systems and processes. He has extensive experience helping organizations drive strategic value through innovative portfolio strategies and data-driven decision-making. Jim's career is marked by a commitment to advancing the PPM field, enabling organizations to stay competitive in today's evolving landscape. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us.
Our pleasure.
Glad to be here. Looking forward to it.
All right, so today's going to be a little bit of a fireside chat / Q&A. It's very open for us to have questions throughout the time that we have here together. So again, I encourage everyone to ask your questions. You don't often get the chance to ask questions directly for people that are really experts in the field. And we've got two great experts here today. So welcome, Mike and Jim. Strategic management is something that's often easier said than truly done. We all talk about being strategically aligned, and then we find out that that's not really the case, or we find that we've spent money on things that we maybe shouldn't have, or wasted resources. So today, the first question I'd like to ask is, what are the problems and challenges that organizations face in creating well-formed and strategically aligned project portfolios? What are you seeing out there that's causing these issues?
I think for me, I think the first thing we have to acknowledge is that, this is or should be a very mature discipline, portfolio management. But what I actually see is a lot of organizations haven't come a long way since the 1990s in terms of their practices. And that's despite the fact that there are some incredible thinkers out there advocating for improvements in process. There are some tremendous tools out there, and I think this is one of the reasons why we're here. It's because OnePlan is one of those tremendous tools. Things that we would have killed for back in the 1990s when we were using index cards to inventory what was going on and to capture the information. And I think that the real problem that organizations face is fundamentally individual behaviors. I think there is I don't know, it's conservatism, but there's a kind of status quoism, that sense that, we know what we're doing, we just keep going and everything is all right. And I think that is coupled with behaviors throughout the organization of, well, I know what projects I need, and therefore I'm going to push for them. And what we therefore see is organizations where too many projects are selected based on the advocacy of the managers and leaders who are promoting them, and therefore the success of a project getting through the development stage, through the discovery stage, and into planning and delivery is largely connected to the level of authority or influence or persuasive power of the the sponsor, the manager behind it. I mean, I don't know whether you're seeing similar things, Jim.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, as far as the lack of evolution, I think by nature, project and portfolio managers aren't huge risk takers, or do they like cutting edge? They find something that's working for them and they try to maintain some stability there.
Yeah.
So technology and the marketplace and market forces are changing such that we have to adapt, right?
Yeah.
And take on some new things, especially in this age of large digital and business transformations, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like we got to get out of our comfort zones and adopt some enhanced approaches and principles in order to keep abreast and to stay relevant.
Yeah, and I think actually that word comfort zone, I think, is really key to a lot of what goes on in organizations, because as human beings, we're not keen on conflict, all evidence of the history of the world. But in our organizations, I think well, one of the things I hear a lot of project managers say is, I'm not interested in politics. And I think that's the higher you go up through the organization, the more politics there is. And yet you get project managers taking on a portfolio management role and not wanting to get into conflict with managers throughout the organization who've got their entrenched behaviors. And so as a result, we see organizations accepting projects which just are not well aligned to their strategy. Bad projects because actually they take the organization the wrong way, because one manager with a lot of get up and go is persuading them. Or we see projects where they're valuable, but they're not as valuable as they should be to gather the resources, or they're too risky, or possibly these are projects which are great projects except someone else is already doing it. And as a result, we just get this mess because we're not keen to tell organizational colleagues that they shouldn't be doing this. And part of that is because we don't have sufficient governance procedures behind us, and we don't have sufficient governance procedures because we don't feel like we really have the tools to embed them.
Yeah, I would say, that avoidance of conflict is really a barrier to communication. And so, you can't achieve the synergies if you're kind of protecting your own silo, right, of what it is that you do within the organization. And I think, part of the reasons we have barriers in this area is because of the fact there is a lack of communication ongoing, and as things change, how that change is, gone through there. And then I think as far as doing the right projects, it's very easy to have redundant efforts, people working on the same thing for achieving the same outcome and spending money, multiple times for the same result. And it's also working on the wrong things. The extreme case I always like to use is, I might have a suggestion and an idea, or maybe even some technology that'll help me, create a golf ball that'll be, that everybody can hit 400 yards. Great demand for that. But if I'm a software company, does that really align with what I'm doing? It's a great idea, but is it a great idea for us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is, it's, if you've got a manager who has that brilliant idea, then they're also going to be hesitant to take that idea forward if they feel like it's going to get knocked down. So what they'll do is they'll just set up a little kind of rogue skunk works within their team, where they don't have to apply for any budget because they can use a bit of budget. And then they kind of rely on the sunk cost bias of people saying, oh, we've already spent some money on it, so I guess we better finish it. So you get all of this going on. And I think there's just so many causes. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is, simply, all you said, coordination is important. Too many managers don't really understand the organization strategy because the communication isn't good enough. And if they do understand the strategy, they don't understand the process to put things up. And so I think we're so dependent on organizations finding real clarity around their portfolio management processes. I think we need to find ways to help organizations to embed. We know how they work. OnePlan has tools that will make them work effectively. We've got numerous really good books out there that will explain the theory and the tool sets that you can implement, the kind of thinking tools. you've got the technology tools. So I think we've got to find ways to help people to really embed these. What are the reasons you see, Jim, for people not adopting?
One is, I think, parochial, siloed, things in the different functional areas, and the perceived preferences and priorities of different stakeholders, different functional areas, even personal preferences, like you say. With those desk drawer kind of rogue projects that they pull out, right? And then the other part of it is, I think, the old school, the 90s, was to come up with an annual operating plan for your portfolio and then put it up on the wall and say, this is our plan. And it was very static. Well, that doesn't play in this fast changing world that we have, right? That more static approach doesn't work. And sometimes even quarterly addressing of a portfolio isn't enough in organizations, right?
Absolutely.
We have to be more dynamic and triggered by events, right? As opposed to that. And I would say, the real challenge for people is this: if we're continuously looking at new ideas, then we've got too much churn and too much disruption, right? We have to find the right balance of being responsive and keeping our eye on the ball, right? And getting the things we have delivered. So it really is kind of a balancing act.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a whole kind of piece around the way that we communicate with our organization about the kind of tools we've got. And there's that resistance to using tools that feel like someone has imposed them on us. And as portfolio managers, we need to be mindful that introducing a portfolio process and a tool set has to be another organizational change project, part of the portfolio, if you like. But I like your idea of your point you make about the frequency with which we need to address our portfolio, because I think the argument now is settled on this kind of debate about, should we do predictive project management or agile project management and things. I think it's always been so, but the pace of change now means that we have to stay adaptive, and we have to find processes that allow us to plan where we need to plan, but to adapt. And years ago, when I was first introduced to the idea of portfolio, we talked about the idea of having some element of spread in the portfolio, so that some of our projects and programs were oriented towards a more nebulous outcome, so that we could shift them as the world became clearer. And what that, I think, means is creating programs which have a range of projects, and then frequently coming back and looking at how do we cull that project group and then add to it on a regular basis. And so it's, like you say, it's no longer good enough just to have an annual strategy process and then a portfolio management process. We need live real-time tools with live real-time data. And if we don't have that, then we're lost, because our competitors will have them. When you're trying to persuade people when you're trying to introduce the tool sets that you have, what are the common points of resistance that you find in organizations?
Other than just the normal resistance in human nature to resist change in general?
Absolutely, yeah. But of course we shouldn't reject that, because it's one of my top pet topics, but it's a very real thing that there doesn't actually need to be a reason. There's just, or at least there doesn't need to be a good reason. But when you get down to it, organizationally, what are the strong kind of pushbacks you get?
Yeah, I always find it ironic that managing projects successfully is really about the successful management of change as it occurs, and be change averse, and that be one of your primary missions. It's it's a little counterintuitive, right? But I think some of it is culture. It's like, I think you alluded to it a little bit. If you have a culture where you're fearful of failing, then you don't stick your neck out to try things, right? In this world of more agile approaches, that whole idea is experiment and try things, and if you fail fast and move on, right?
Yes.
And the idea is that that gets us to experiment to a proper degree and take some risk, right? And not miss opportunities. But on the other hand, let's not just keep chasing good money after bad, right? In order to, let's move on and find what those new priorities are. So some of it is culture, right? And I think also some of it is, I think people want to maintain some control of their own domain and their own destiny, and to rely on others for their success, And I think nowadays, with this age of digital transformation and business transformation, so many big projects and programs are cross-functional now across the entire organization. There's components, and we can't afford to be parochial about this. We can't afford to, just look at our own benefits, right? Everybody's all going to say, okay, what's in it for me? And that's great, but we also have to look at what's in it for the others and for the organization's benefit as a whole. I mean, we have to be driving towards value and outcomes, right? Not just delivering things for the sake of delivering things.
Yeah, and we're back to your silo comment, that organizations become siloed and people think, okay, I've got to deliver for my function. But actually, one of the things I see in a lot of big organizations, multinational organizations, is the matrix structure getting in the way of good portfolio alignment, because when you've got a series of silos that are kind of all vertical, at least you know that you've got to talk across those silos and coordinate. But when you've got a true matrix organization, and as a senior manager, I may be beholden to my regional boss and to my functional boss and to my brand boss. So I might be, for example, delivering a washing machine into South America, and it might be a branded washing machine, so I've got a brand accountability. It might be a washing machine, so I've got a white goods functional accountability, and it might be a South America, so I've got South America sales accountability. And then how do you build a real accountability for the choices about how you're going to invest your money in new initiatives if, on the face of it, the brand doesn't want to spend money on regional stuff and the region doesn't want to spend money on functional stuff? It's only if you have that enterprise tier of clear strategy for the business and clear criteria that we're going to talk about in a moment, that you've got any chance of making this work. And once you've got that, of course, the critical thing then is that everyone in the organization has to get into that cultural mindset of saying, actually, I do understand what our strategy is, I do understand what the process is, and I believe that this process works and that it's the only real way of getting the funding I need to make my projects work.
The concept of a matrixed organization, project management, from the beginning has always had the challenge: how do you get things done and enlist the cooperation of people when you don't have the line authority to force them to do it? Right.
Yeah.
And I think that applies to portfolio management as well, right?
Yeah.
Especially when we start going cross folio. So those practices, it's a skill set that has to be developed, and people to be able to do those things, right?
Yeah.
But they also have to have the charter and the management support that's clearly communicated that they do have the let's just say dotted line authority to make that happen, right?
Yeah.
So that's key. And I think the other piece of it is, I think it comes back to communication. Is there a clearly unified strategic plan that is communicated consistently cross-functionally, so that everybody has got the same North Star, right? That they're working towards. And if they don't, things will splinter, often to people's own, personal interests and directions commonly. And I think the other piece that's a barrier is that sometimes people get a little too ambitious and they try to do things beyond what their level of current maturity is. I think taking a phased approach into things like that, what's the way we can stretch the organization to the next level of maturity without breaking the organization? How can, it's really tailoring that. Every organization is going to be a little bit different from to meet them where they're at.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always the case. You should never make perfection the enemy of progress. And we should be adaptive in how we implement these things. We should start with something that's better than nothing and then learn from it and grow from it. And I think that's kind of winding us into, I think, where Tanya's next question is going to be. But I want to check, Tanya, have we answered the question that you posed?
I do think so. I was going to ask a follow-up question to you, Mike, before we move on, and that is,
Sure.
We talked about human nature and culture and all these things, and I think it's human nature to want to say yes to everyone when you're in a work environment. You want to be the one who's liked, and we talked about all these different projects that might come in from different organizations and the 400-yard golf ball. People want to say yes to that. How would you recommend people really go about saying no? Like, do you have suggestions for people who have to make those hard decisions and say no to the 400-yard golf ball in a real world situation?
I mean, that's a brilliant question. And funny enough, I don't know whether you know this, but I actually wrote a book called the Yes No Book about how to say no. So it's right in my hotspot. And you're right. People build their careers on their reputation for being able to say yes and deliver on it. The problem is, as they get higher in the organization, there are more questions, and therefore that we don't have the capacity to say yes, and the organization doesn't have the capacity for us all to say yes. So I've introduced this term, noble objection. So we don't like to say no because it sounds negative, but if we reframe no as not a single word, no, but as an acronym, NO, which stands for noble objection, then who wouldn't want to be noble? And a noble objection is when we decline to do something, but to be noble, first of all, we have to decline for a good reason. And in the context of our conversation here, that is a reason which aligns with strategies, which is for the good of the organization that we are paid to represent. And secondly, a noble objection is only noble if you do it in a respectful manner. So how you say no matters. In our day-to-day work, I also say never a naked no, because human beings are triggered by being turned down. I say, you ask me to do something, I say no. Or even if I say, no, I can't do that, I'm afraid. That's polite, but the next question that comes into their mind is why? Because we're all, 7-year-olds at heart. And so the answer, because, tells them immediately that there is an answer to their why and starts to satisfy them. So we never give a naked no, we always give a because. And if we can, we also give an alternative. I can't do this, but here is something you could do, or someone you could ask. And of course, in a strategic sense, a noble objection is we can't take on this initiative because it is not aligned to our strategy. But if you believe that it is, here is the process to put the information forward, get it assessed by the right people. Here's who you can lobby and the mechanism by which lobbying those people is appropriate. And so we need to stop thinking about no as a negative, but actually no as a strategic choice.
And no isn't just a flat out always no. People have invested time and effort into making their case, potentially even a full business case at times.
Yeah.
Get that no. Maybe the answer is it's a great idea, but not at this particular moment.
Absolutely.
Can we capture that? If we have a good, solid intake process that basically gets ideas from all over the organization, they're going to have early stage vetting, right? Some may get to the later stages and still get declined, but the thing is, for future consideration, not that it's out of hand, we're going to discard it, right? And all that planning basis that happens. So there's value there, and to communicate that it's still under consideration for a future time can be, let's just say, a little bit positive.
Yeah, I like that, because in human interaction, we talk about growth mindset, and I think my daughter was taught at primary school just not yet. Can you do that? Not yet. And as an organization, we should say not yet. Are we at the highest level of maturity in our portfolio operations? Not yet. It's that sense of determination. Absolutely.
We don't want to despirit or demoralize the people that are basically coming up with the ideas. We want them to feel open to float ideas to us. We don't want to close off that line of communication.
Absolutely.
Terrific. Well, I think that's a great answer. And there was a lot of notes in the chat from folks that resonated with that noble objection. So That was a great takeaway from today's event for those online here. So Mike, you
I'm
talked.
going to borrow that for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Bear with me. There you go, folks.
There we go.
Available
Yes,
in
no
all good
book.
bookshops.
Nice. So Mike, I think you talked a little bit about earlier some of the solutions to the challenges that we talked about, and the first one being creating that kind of enterprise level layer so that there's something that's being looked at above all these different silos and functional areas in the business. What other solutions do you see, working well for organizations?
Yeah, I think that's the key to it, isn't it? And I think the key to the solution is a strong process that is embedded into not just the governance of the organization, but the culture of the governance, the culture of the organization. And I think that's got to be based firstly on a really clear process, a good process for developing strategy. And then out of that strategy, we need the kind of accountable criteria, OKRs, if that's the language that your organization speaks, objectives and key results that flow from the strategy. I think it needs to be easy to work with. The workflow needs to be easy for people to understand, and that means almost certainly in the modern world a sound system base, a technology base that allows you to implement the workflow that fits with your culture and your needs. And that also has to create transparency of decision making. I think if decision making isn't transparent, then people will rebel. And you also have to be able to monitor the outcomes. It's no good taking on what you think is a perfect portfolio and not being able to evaluate whether it's delivered the objectives and the outcomes that you set out for it, to match your OKRs. So that will probably all need some form of, I don't know whether you're going to call it a portfolio management office or an enterprise portfolio management office or a value management office, but the process that they will need to run for me needs to start with actually understanding what's going on in the organization now, because as Jim said, if you're not there, if you don't have a process, then you probably don't know what's going on in your organization. So when I was consulting, we did for a number of organizations a complete inventory of the projects, and as I say, when I was doing that, when I first did that in the 1990s, we were putting every project on an index card and sticking them up on the wall in the boardroom for the board to see what a mess they were in, because they had hundreds of, I remember a board member saying, we don't do all these projects. And I said, well, go have a look at those cards, see if you can find one that you cannot stand up, because we've spoken to people. So we inventory the current set of initiatives. We learn the core data that we will need to properly evaluate their place. And then I think in the modern world, we need to make that inventory visible for that transparency, and that's more than just putting it up on the boardroom wall. And now we can put it up on the internet wall or the intranet wall. And parallel to that, we also need to understand what measures we're going to use to test that inventory against. So that means developing objectives and key results that fully integrate with our business strategy. And from those, we can create evaluation criteria that are based on the strategy, based on the OKRs, and therefore gives us a way that we can test our inventory and say, right, these are all the things we're doing. Which ones clearly are initiatives that stand head and shoulders above the others as delivering or as high likelihood of delivering? Which ones clearly conflict with our strategy? Which ones are in the grey area? They're sort of aligned, but the value proposition looks weak, or their risk seems too high, or they seem too similar to something else that's going on. And then if we can stabilize our current strategy, and that means saying no to a lot of projects, and there's a marvelous phrase in the journalistic industry, in newspapers and writing in general, which is, we've got to slaughter your darlings, which means in the sense of writing, you've written this fantastic 20 paragraph piece for the magazine, but there's only room for 18 paragraphs, but you've sweated blood over the beauty of the language you've used, and you've got to slaughter your darlings. And there will be a lot of resistance, but you've got to face up to that resistance. And Jim's smiling, so I'm guessing he's been there as well. You've got to have that hard conversation with someone and say, your project, it's a great project, but it's not great enough. And you know, sometimes projects don't fail because they're the wrong project with the wrong project manager with bad processes. They fail because actually the organization is trying to do too much, and it cannot give the resources it needs to every project. And if it gives the resources to the wrong projects, then it delivers the wrong value proposition. So we've got to say that this project is better than this project, and therefore, since we've only got resources to do one, a good project must either wait, not yet, or be canned. And then you can start to build the heartbeat processes that you're going to use going forward to submit business cases that fit the organization's governance needs, make sure everybody understands how they submit those business proposals, those project proposals, and then a strong process to evaluate each new initiative against the criteria. And to take Jim's point, you've got to find the right cadence for your organization. Are you a very stable, staid organization that has to work on long time scales? Or are you an entrepreneurial organization working in a fast moving industry where if you wait to the next quarter, your competitors will have started the projects which will take them ahead of you? And sometimes this will need to be a big process that will involve layers of evaluation, layers of conversation. And so you're balancing the need for stability against adaptability. And I think you're also going to need to find the tools you need to help you make those decisions. And increasingly, and I think, you know, this is where I'm probably going to lean heavily on Jim's experience, but increasingly we're seeing more and more good quality AI tools that are able to help model the future with multiple scenarios of portfolio to support our decision process. I think probably down the line, maybe it's 5, 10, 15 years away, we will increasingly be led by the AI. But now I think what we're looking at, in my experience, Jim may tell me different, but in my experience now, we're looking at using AI tools to sift the data and present us with information that will help us make decisions. So that, I think, is the outline process. But I'd be interested to hear Jim's take on that process, and then perhaps we can find out how modern software can make that easy.
Yeah, I think you make very good points, because, you know, one is the whole process end to end has to be visible and has to be aligned, right? I mean, we've had people, you know, prioritize things based on gut feel and personal preference, all the way to people have had scoring models for scoring their projects and their ideas and requests that come in, and use that prioritization scheme to make their decisions, right? But no matter how well they score, if they're not well strategically aligned to where the organization wants to go, if you can't align it and point it to a key result and an objective in that strategic plan, you have to ask yourself, why are we doing it in the first place, right? No matter how well it scores, you know, back to the golf ball, right? So the idea there is we have to factor in many more dimensions now than we used to in the past, right? And I think to do that, we have to have common visibility, because I think with the proliferation of tools, sometimes this stuff is segmented in different places. The intake's over here, the resource management's over here, you know, the portfolio selection is over here, and they're not end to end, right, in a common place where you can actually see all these things happen and take it through the entire life cycle or the entire process, right? Yeah. So I think enabling that so that you have the visibility, the alignment, and the ability to look at it for its entire life cycle, I think gives us the ability to constantly reevaluate, right? It's not just whether or not we accept a new idea or request, but should we pause or suspend something or just kill something, you know, that we're already working on in favor of something that much more important comes down the pike? And is that where we should be putting our time and resources? Yeah. So, and then as we look at many more dimensions than we used to, that's where AI can come in to supplement our human interpretation of all that, right? So if we're looking at it, and we might be looking at prioritization schemes, we might be looking at strategic alignment, we may be looking at some crowdsourcing, voting that people are doing on those types of things, and factor in all those things to come up with what are the best candidates, right?
Yeah.
And we may be looking and supplementing. I mean, we're ultimately these days making our own decisions, but the AI can maybe give us insights that we didn't get with our own discernments, right? So I think that's really kind of where things are today.
Yeah.
We're moving quickly, though, into where we have more, at least semi-autonomous things, where the AI will be looking at things and alerting us to opportunities or potential issues, right? Not just us querying and giving it prompts and getting responses and analysis. So
Yes.
we're very quickly going to move into the more, at least semi-autonomous aspects of those things. But once again, we end up making the decisions at the end of the day. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it, that one of the things that is uniquely human about decision making is I think Malcolm Gladwell called it thin slicing, but Gary Klein's been doing this research for years, where he's realized that people who have deep expertise can access an understanding at an unconscious level of a complex situation. But the reality is that even if you've got anyone in your organization who can look at a whole load of potential portfolio candidates and thin slice it down, that one person isn't going to be enough to provide an understanding, and they're not going to understand necessarily. Gary Klein's experience is that these people don't understand how they know something is true. Their depth of experiences tells them it, whereas AI can cut through all this data, but it knows, it is able to discern the process it's taken. So I think it's fascinating to see, it will be fascinating to see how software like yours develops over the years from where it is now, which I'm sure you're going to tell us in a minute, but to where it could possibly be in the future, which is wonderful. If organizations can take it on board today, they can be ready and understand and have a strong baseline for the capabilities of the future.
Agreed. The combinations of the AI having learned in these large language models, the general knowledge that it has, including things like the strategic portfolio management disciplines and those types of things, being able to be trained on the tool sets that you're bringing to bear and what their capabilities are, and then also layering in the specifics about the data that you're analyzing and putting those things in context of one another, you get a pretty powerful mix of analysis there, right?
Yeah.
So, exciting times. So, should we talk a little bit about the capabilities that are available today?
Yeah, I'd like to hear that.
Is my screen being shared?
Yes.
All right, so let me get back to the slideshow here. And let's talk about, the next step in the evolution here is really about, sorry, I'm trying to get back to, there we go, where beyond just prioritizing things, we have to align strategy with execution. And, as Mike was talking about, it's a process, right, that has to be put in place, and it involves the people, the strategy, and the operations of the organization. And it has to be systematic in the way we do this. And everybody has to be on board. So it includes strategic development of a plan strategically, organizational alignment around that plan, operational plans, and then monitoring, learning, and testing and adapting continuously afterwards to make sure that we're doing the right things all the time. And it really forms the basis for an increase in value by executing the strategy with the things that we choose to do in our portfolio. Now, OnePlan is designed to bring those aspects all together. For example, the strategic plans, the OKRs that the business leaders will put in place to be, essentially the direction they want the organization to be headed in. And then the execution leaders, regardless of what they're doing, what tools they're using, what approaches they're using, whether it's more agile, more adaptive, more traditional waterfall or predictive, the idea is all those things have to be executed on that we decide to do ultimately. And then there may be other things in strategic portfolio management, especially in this digital age. There may be application portfolios, product portfolios, even other architecture or business architecture elements that you have to factor into the decision, such that, either those things have to be improved or updated or modified so you can be successful with the initiative itself, or it's just something that has to be a capability that the organization needs to develop or mature. And the challenge here now, as we've talked about, is that we have to go and do these things cross-functionally across an organization, increasingly so, because the things that we're tackling are more broad in nature and touch a variety of parts of the organization, then you need a tool set that's going to bring those things together. And OnePlan is designed to connect that strategy with execution, to have high-level strategies and other elements up there. And regardless of the execution tools you choose to use, now OnePlan has the capabilities to execute these things right in the tool itself. We don't depend on other tools. But in these Microsoft-oriented examples, whether it be Planner or Planner Premium, which used to be called Project for the Web, the Project Professional on the desktop, the Azure DevOps people are using for for more agile approaches. Same thing would hold true with Jira and other execution tools. The idea is that doesn't need to be a barrier if you want to align those things and bring them together into a overall strategic portfolio management platform. So ultimately, the things you have to have end to end are the OKRs or the strategy, the way that you lay out the strategies, because this really sets the course and is the basis for which everything else would come. That enterprise or business architecture elements that we might want to factor in might have to be aligned with those. But ultimately, the intake, the ideation, and the requests that come in, they should all be looked at with the lens and the perspective of what are those OKRs? And is what we're doing going to help further that mission to help us achieve those things as an organization? Having those all in a common tool set is powerful. So ultimately, we can select the right portfolios of the things to work on. Whether we look at things in a more traditional list view, whether or not we take more agile approaches. Some people do what they call program increment planning in more agile approaches or lean approaches, or even just the roadmap types of views of where we're going, when these things are going to be delivered, and have those perspectives. And ultimately, Mike, talked about, are we overloading our resource availability or capacity? Are we taking on more stuff than we can reasonably achieve successfully, or are we going to overcommit and maybe not deliver anything on a quality basis? And the same thing holds true with financials. Do we have the budget to do the things that we need to do as we do the selection? So we have to do things in the context of our real world constraints. And if we're really going to reassess these things on an ongoing basis, you got to have some what if scenario modeling capability to evaluate alternatives in a quantification of those types of things, and just examine the trade-offs and make decisions based upon those alternatives. Now on the execution side, that isn't our real focus today, but to be able to plan out whether they're waterfall plans, whether they're more agile plans, or we're using a different set of tool sets, OnePlan gives you the capability to do it just all within OnePlan, or we have built-in connectors that allow us to connect to the more popular execution tools that are out there. So the proliferation of those execution tools doesn't need to be a barrier for you to get into more strategic portfolio management. It doesn't need to be a hindrance. Resource planning builds up to an overall capacity plan. And the key on the communication is the feedback. Having individual contributors in this project and portfolio management process to be able to have an area that goes that everything that's been put on their plate, whether they be work items, whether they be issues, whether they be risks and other things and changes that come down the pike, being able to have one place to go to feed that back so it can be factored into the status as we redirect or continue on is really important. And then ultimately all the reporting that you might want to illustrate all those things. So once again, to have all those things under one hood, even if some of the sources of data may be coming from other places, having it aggregate as your hub is really important to do this effectively. The key is that we want the outcomes that we're looking for. We can leverage artificial intelligence today in OnePlan. Our AI assistant is called Sophia GPT, and it comes with the base product, and you can leverage it today to do some very practical things. Ultimately, our goal is to do the right work, select the right things to work on, and then have the tool sets to execute well, to do the work right. So with that, I just thought I'd bring up just a couple of quick examples, and this is not meant to be exhaustive, but just to show that things like OnePlan can have a variety of different areas that are all interrelated, meaning we can actually have our objectives and our key results modeled here within OnePlan. And the idea here is that you can model those as far as overall objectives and strategies, and the more tangible, measurable key results that are going to indicate, are we tracking towards achieving those objectives, right? And as we do that, how are those things modeled? Basically looking into any one objective, for example, and being able to see how it interrelates to everything else in the tool. I'll jump ahead a little bit. but in the visualizations, does this thing have any predecessors or successors to work on? But more importantly, is it related to a number of other things? For example, in this particular view, which we can fashion this view, this objective actually has 3 tangible key results, which are related to 3 different projects in Epics, or 4 different projects in Epics are out there, and also directly or indirectly related to different products and applications or business capabilities and or value streams that are out there. Meaning, as I factor in these decisions, what are the things that are impacted or that will impact us? And be able at any given point in time, if something's off track, to basically get a gauge of the details around those things and figure out why this thing may or may not be tracking as we go through, and have that visibility all the way across, right? It doesn't matter whether, you know, the project was aligned to it from this objective planning, or whether or not in your project planning you decide to align it. You can do those associations from either side of the coin. Ultimately, as we go down and we start thinking about ideation and the requests, OnePlan provides a portal capability such that you can work on these things at any given point in time, and have anyone in the organization submit an idea or request. And then people with the authority and the permissions to do so can then vet these things and evaluate them as you go through. In this particular case, I see some voting is going on. I got some indication of those associations that we showed graphically in that visualizer. And there may be even some prioritization scoring that we might want to factor into the mix as well. You know, ultimately, you know, when you drill in and you do this, instead of having this in a separate place or in some separate documents, I can drill into a particular idea or request and look at the details. We can basically tailor through drag and drop these forms and the data that we want to have, so that we can build different business cases and things that we might want around that. We can actually even use the AI to help us develop some of the narrative in these things and say, help generate a value statement for me and put that in place. And as a matter of fact, this one that you see in here was actually generated by the AI that we can then modify, so we're not starting from scratch all the time. Ultimately, you know, when I go back to the ideas here and I look at this, we can basically see on this particular idea, if I went to visualize how this is related to other things, instead of looking at it from the objective-centric view, I can now see that this particular idea has been aligned with a certain key result, which in turn is aligned with an objective, and indirectly is impacted or associated with a particular product that we're working on. Now, ultimately, you know, for an example of how you might use something like Sophia in the AI process, you know, I might come into this idea area and I might ask it, you know, a prompt or a question. You know, here I'm in this alignment view that we're here we're in this alignment view, and Sophia is always available to us down here. So I can bring it up at any given point in time, and you can set up what your standard prompts are in here and tailor those types of things. But let's just say I want to consider multiple factors. I could come in here and say something like, based on votes, priority, and ROI, what 3 projects or ideas should we approve first and why? And it's going to not only analyze its general knowledge like I talked about and what it's been trained, but also then transactionally, without learning from it and retaining it, looking at the data that you have in here and the data points that you've captured to be considered. And here it's laying out for me the method it's going to be using for that. And now it's kind of laying out to me the elements that we should maybe consider first based on the priority and their importance to the organization, and giving me some justification so that when I make my decision, I've maybe factored in some things I hadn't considered. So once again, those things are available to us at any given point in time. Then ultimately, we're going to end up through these selection processes with a portfolio that we can manage in the ways that we want. And then, you know, as we look at these portfolios, we can then come in and see how they are aligned overall with everything that's going on. So for example, if I look at a particular portfolio and it has a program within that portfolio and actually a number of different projects, which are actually aligned with other tool sets that we have out here, I can basically come in and look at any given project and execute on that, which we won't delve into today, but basically see things, how these things are related to everything else. And looking at it from a more project-centric view, I can see there's predecessors and successors to this project but the general broader association, I can see how this ties back to different key results and objectives, and how downstream or how they're associated with the other business and enterprise architecture elements as well. I would say ultimately, if we want to evaluate alternatives, and I'll leave it at this, we can set up different models where we have prospective projects that we want to look at. And I can basically take a look at and see, here's the prospective mix of projects we want to work on. And I can take a look at any given point in time, and I can see this model has a lot of resource constraints where I don't really have the resource capacity to do all this, right? And I might not even have the budget dollars to do it all after we did financial planning around this, and we may be over allocated. The key here is that we could actually do basically different scenarios where I might sit there and say, all right, let's say I have a $10 million constraint. I can do a combination of selection and deselection of both active and proposed and on-hold projects. In this case, it's already been done, but there's, out of those 43 potentials, only 20 of them could be done within this budget. And I can look at this and I can see that I've gotten a mix of projects that I've selected in a priority basis to fit within an overall $10 million budget range that's within here. And probably, well, I can also take a look and see, does it fit within the resource constraints that I have? And as I look at the resources in here, I could take a look and see that I've gotten most of that red out of here in this constraint. Looks like it's maybe even doable from that. Now, as I save these different scenarios, and I can save as many as I want, I can do things like compare those scenarios and see, the key data elements I'm tracking. For an additional $5 million on a $15 million scenario, what's the benefit? Well, I can achieve maybe another $7 million in benefit. Is it worth me investing that additional $5 million? Maybe, maybe not. Looking at things like the visualizer in another way, and basically taking a look and saying, are there things that we didn't select that are predecessors that we maybe should reconsider, that we overlooked something there? And then overall looking at that runway in the model of how things are all interrelated. So once again, that's a high level demonstration of capabilities of how all this fits under one roof. And as we select the right portfolio, we can then execute with confidence that we're working on things that are important to the organization and is going to deliver value. Any comments on that, Mike?
I tell you what, the first thing that really struck me was when I first started getting involved in portfolio management, I would have killed for that piece of software. But the serious thing, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that someone asked a bit about benefits management, which of course is a closely allied topic. And it seems to me that runway chart is a great way of starting the process of understanding the benefits flow as well. And so I guess my kind of follow on from that is, are you able to use or adapt that tool to do benefits management, or is it a separate module within OnePlan?
No, we can definitely do that. We can do it from a financial benefits basis, where we can look at things like cost savings and an anticipated revenue, yep. Right? So we can actually quantify those things on a time phase basis. So not only track costs, but look at the anticipated benefits that we might have in a business case, and then maybe even track those financial ones on an actual basis or a realized basis afterwards, because that's where many organizations drop the ball. They don't really have the wherewithal necessarily to look at the realization of those benefits that were outlined in the business case, right? On the other hand, we could also have a portfolio of benefits that we're looking to achieve for the organization, and we can align those things, our initiatives and projects with those, and see how they align and what we're contributing to on those benefits as well. So yes, we can do that within OnePlan.
Yeah, I mean, that runway chart is it's so familiar from the sort of chart you see in a lot of benefits management approaches of actually these projects create these benefits and they link to these strategic goals and these OKRs. So just seeing that just kind of put me in mind of the benefits question that I'd spotted. So I think that all makes good sense, and benefits management is such an integral part of portfolio management that you can't separate them, except you have to talk about them to give them the time they need, but they are fundamentally kind of two sides of the same coin.
Definitely. Should we open up are there any questions in the panel that we should address before we run out of time?
Yeah, there's a couple questions. The first question I think is really interesting. So, someone mentioned that in the name of agile execution, sometimes processes are overlooked or bypassed. So do you have some ideas on how you can balance that agility with the processes that you need to do things right the first time, right? Sometimes people are moving too fast and then they, bowl over all these processes.
Shall I kick off with my sense of the principles, and then Jim can kind of apply that, perhaps put his take on it, and also apply that to the OnePlan. I think, first of all, we always have to remember where Agile comes from. Agile actually is fundamentally a software development mindset, and the core Agile methodologies are actually software development methodologies. And software developers, their job is to develop software quickly and efficiently, and to get working software. So it is no surprise that their needs to work effectively in an agile way can conflict with a project manager, a program manager, a portfolio manager's needs to deliver a wider project of which the software is part. So I think asking the question, how do we get that kind of agile bypassing processes is fundamentally to misunderstand what agile is. I think the in principle solution is to recognize that agile is a way of doing different things, and they can fit within a wider portfolio and within wider projects and programs within that portfolio as ways of getting parts of them done. And so if the people who are pushing for a more and more agile approach to doing things understand that they can be agile, and if the organization lets them be agile but constrains their overall goal within a more structured process, then things can work. But the other thing I would say is to remind you what Jim said, seems like a long time ago now, but it's less than an hour ago, where he pointed out that we can't be doing portfolio management on a yearly cycle or even on a quarterly cycle in many organizations. So we have to adopt the principles of Agile, of actually recognizing the changing situation and adapting fast in our portfolio management. So there's not a conflict between them, I would say. I think they are entirely complementary approaches.
Yeah, and I think people conflate sometimes agility with the agile approach to software development, right?
Good point.
They're synonymous, but they're not the same thing. Little a and big A agile, right? Yep. And so I think the concepts can be applied here to portfolio management. Like we talked earlier on about experiment and fail fast, to be iterative on the way we do these things in the portfolio and how often we actually reassess the portfolio. We can also be focused on outcomes and value, just like we try to be in more agile approaches. And much like scaled agile approaches like SAFe, think about what we want to do with governance and intake. Think about those as the guardrails, right? We can be nimble and responsive, but to do it in a way that has guardrails and some, let's just say, ability to be responsive, but within the context of the organization's process. So I think I agree with you. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, right? Nor contradictory in any way.
No. And I think the other thing that for people who didn't kind of pick up on it, one of the things you said is that OnePlan and integrates with tools like Jira, which are designed to deliver agile working with the teams that are using it. So again, the whole thing is one big system, and you can design the system to work for your culture and your business needs.
Yeah, we can bring that portfolio level of capability to the execution tools like a Jira that innately don't really have that capability, right?
Yeah.
So we can layer that on to your existing use. So you don't have to disrupt what you're doing on the execution level to achieve strategic portfolio management.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're on the top of the hour. I think maybe one more quick yes or no question for both of you. Will AI replace project managers in the next 30 years? Yes or no, Mike?
No, but it will allow us to change our focus, because it will replace us for some of the things that we do, is my answer.
Yeah, I think the answer is no. It'll complement what we're doing, and it'll maybe free us up from the mundane routine to focus on more high value things to accomplish. The role will change, but it won't go away.
Well, we're at the top of the hour. Lots of thank yous in the question box for both of you for your time. I appreciate it. Very great insights. So I hope that those on the call share this out with your teams. Some really terrific ideas and advice. And thanks to everyone for joining us. Mike, Jim, thank you. Have a great afternoon and day.
Great pleasure. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you.